Hello, this is Jacqueline from Jack Knits. Are you ready to take your knitting to another level? I'm going to show you 6 very simple things that you can do today in your knitting to bring your knitting from good to great. So let's get started. So hello, I'm Jacqueline from Jack Knits, and we're going to take a look at these 6 things that you can do to make your knitting from good to great. But I would suggest if you like this video and like some of these tips that you follow and subscribe to my knitting channel. I provide lots of tips and tutorials on knitting stitches, very fun creative patterns. So if you like what you see here, don't forget to subscribe and get videos all about wonderful knitting tips and techniques. All right, let's take a look at these 6 things that you can do to improve your knitting and to make your finished project look much more professional. Okay, so the very first thing I want to suggest to you is to make sure you are choosing the right yarn for your project. I know sometimes we get a little crazy when we are in the yarn store and we are kind of tempted by such really beautiful, fun yarns. But I want to warn you against choosing a very fancy, fuzzy, or unique style yarn for your knitting project. Yarn like this, for instance, is very pretty. It's very soft and gorgeous, but it's got a very definite texture to it, kind of fuzzy edges. Same thing with this one, very fuzzy. And when you choose a fancy yarn like that, you're not going to be able to see your individual stitches if you are knitting with like a unique stitch pattern for a finished project. It's going to hide those. It's just going to kind of look messy. So if you are knitting with these kind of fancy fuzzy yarns, make sure you are choosing a very simple stitch like a garter stitch or stocking net stitch that will show the project. If you choose another stitch, it's just going to kind of look messy. Another thing along the same concept is making sure you are choosing the right size needle for the size of yarn that you are using for your project. If your needle is too large, your stitches will be kind of loose and look very messy and sloppy. If your needle is too small for the weight of your yarn, your finished project will be very dense and tight and stiff. It won't have that nice drapey feel that you get when you are choosing the right yarn needle for the yarn. So pay attention to your pattern, use the recommended yarn weight and size needle. If you need to make small adjustments to match their gauge, that's fine, but generally stick to the correct size needle. Okay, so number 2 that you can do is to be careful not to split your yarns. And what I mean by that is when you're knitting your knit stitches, sometimes your needle doesn't catch the entire yarn of your stitch. It's splitting that, and that you got individual fibers that are left not knitted with the rest of the yarn. And if you leave that unchecked, those little strands of fiber are going to create these funny little loops in your finished project. So pay attention to that, and when you are knitting a knit stitch and you notice that you did not grab that entire yarn, pull your needle back out. Make sure you are grabbing the full stitch, the full yarn when you're knitting each stitch, and then you won't have any of those unsightly little loops around on your finished project. Okay, the number 3 thing that you can do is to correctly weave in your ends at the end of the project. This is the final step in your knitting, and you don't want to create this beautiful thing and then kind of blow it at the end. If you do not correctly weave in your ends, those little ends of your yarn, whether it's a color change or at the beginning or end of your project, will eventually start popping through. And now you're going to get these little stubs of yarn showing through your end project. If you don't know how to correctly weave in your ends, I've got a very easy video to follow on that, and I will have a link in the upper right hand corner that you can follow. It's a very simple technique to make sure that your ends do not unravel and start poking through. So that's the 3rd way you can do to improve your knitting. Okay, the 4th thing that you can do is to work on your tension of your yarn. Now this is going to obviously come with time. The more you knit, the better control you're going to have of your tension. But if you're a brand new knitter and you're noticing that your finished project looks a little uneven or is kind of wonky in its finished size, the edges kind of come and go, take a look at your tension. Try knitting some practice knitting swatches to make sure you've got a nice even tension throughout your project. Work on how you are holding the yarn in your hands. I knit with the working yarn in my left hand, and I like to wrap it around my pinky. It just kind of provides this natural tension of the yarn so I'm not knitting too tight or too loose. So experiment with different ways to hold your yarn until you can get a nice even tension, and that will make your finished project look very professional. All right, the fifth thing that you can do, and this may seem like a no-brainer, but it is to fix your mistakes. I know, of course, you would want to fix your mistakes, right? However, many knitters sometimes don't notice a mistake till they're much further along in their pattern, and they just can't fathom frogging back 2 days worth of knitting to fix a mistake. So you may think that nobody will notice that mistake, and it could be true. It could be a very minor mistake that nobody notices, but you know that it's there, and it could be kind of standing out at the end if you don't fix it. So I would suggest that you routinely check the stitch count on your needles, make sure that it's correct. Look at the finished pattern as you're doing it, make sure it looks correct so you can quickly fix a mistake. If it is a while back that you are knitting and find a mistake, just take a deep breath, frog back, correct that mistake, and go on. You're going to be happy that you did, and you'll be much more happy with your finished project if you don't ignore those mistakes. Okay, the final thing that you can do to make sure your finished project looks very professional is to block your finished work. And I have a video on that as well, on how to block your finished piece, which is essentially, you can do it a couple different ways, but what I show you is to soak it in water, blot it out, and then pin it down on a board in the nice shape that you want. What that does is that water relaxes the fiber. It makes everything nice and smooth. So if you've got stitches that are a little bumpy or a little inconsistent, that blocking will just settle it and make it look nice and flat. If you compare a non-blocked project with a blocking project, you'll see immediately the difference in how professional it looks at the end. So that is also an end thing that you can do after you're done knitting to kind of take your average looking project and make it look much more professional. So I hope you give these 6 very simple techniques a try, and you'll be amazed at how beautiful your knitted projects look after you are done with them, and things that you can do while you're knitting to help them look great. So good luck everybody, happy knitting, and thanks for watching.